I'd never been one for big campgrounds with the crowds and the cars and the noise. I always preferred to be somewhere quiet, off the grid, where I could really feel like I was out in nature. I had a few spots I liked to go, mostly in northern Michigan or Ontario, but this time I decided to try a new area, a state forest in Minnesota, not far from the Canadian border. It was early September, just after Labor Day. The weather had cooled off a little, and the bugs weren't as bad as they'd been a few weeks earlier. I planned on staying 3 nights. I packed light but thorough: tent, small stove, dry food, headlamp, extra batteries, first aid kit, everything in its place. But the most important thing I brought with me was my dog, Sadie. She was a small mixed breed, maybe 15 pounds. I'd had her for almost 6 years. She wasn't some nervous lap dog. She was curious, smart, and loved the woods as much as I did. She'd come with me on dozens of camping trips. I always kept an eye on her, but she was good about sticking close. I had a bright orange vest I'd put on her when we were out walking, and at night I'd keep her tethered to a long lead so she could move around the camp but not wander off. The spot I picked was maybe half a mile from the Forest Service Road. It wasn't an official campsite, but there was a flat clearing near a little creek, and an old fire ring someone had made out of stones. It looked like the area didn't see much traffic. No tire ruts, no trash, just woods and quiet. The first day was peaceful. I set up the tent, gathered some firewood, and let Sadie sniff around. The sky was a dull blue, with thin clouds moving over now and then. We hiked a few short loops before dinner. She stayed just ahead of me, tail up, ears perked. We saw a few squirrels, a rabbit, and once she froze when she spotted a deer way off through the trees. By nightfall, I had a small fire going. I cooked a quick meal, some rice and beans heated over the stove, and fed Sadie her usual portion. She sat with me by the fire, resting her head on my knee like she always did when she was content. I tethered her before I went into the tent, clipping the lead to a ground stake and making sure she had her blanket near the tent door. It was quiet that night, just the usual forest sounds. Crickets, wind in the leaves, the occasional rustle in the underbrush that might have been a mouse or a raccoon. I fell asleep fast, tired from the hike and soothed by the comfort of being away from everything. At some point deep in the night, I woke up, not from a sound exactly, more like a shift in the energy around me, the kind of subtle alertness that comes before your brain fully wakes up. I lay there listening. It was quiet, too quiet. I didn't hear Sadie moving. Usually, I could hear the soft patting of her paws or the jingle of her collar. I sat up slowly and unzipped the tent just enough to poke my head out. The fire had burned down to just a few glowing coals. I could see her shape near the edge of the clearing, lying in the same spot I'd left her. Her leash ran taut to the stake. Then I heard the sound, a sharp whoosh of air and a sudden thump, soft but heavy. Sadie's head lifted for a second. She stood up, looked around, took one step, then something dropped from above. I barely saw it, just a blur, dark wings and a flash of talons. There was no barking, no yelping, just the sound of wings beating the air again. Fast, powerful. I jumped out of the tent barefoot, heart hammering. I grabbed my headlamp from the ground and turned it on, sweeping the beam around. The clearing was still. The lead was stretched tight, but she was gone. The clip on her collar was still attached to the leash. It had snapped apart, clean, pulled with such force that the plastic piece cracked. I stood there frozen for a few seconds, my light searching the tree canopy. I saw nothing, just branches swaying in the breeze. Then I looked down. There were small scuff marks in the dirt where she had stood, a few broken leaves, and 2 long scratch marks in the soft earth, like talons had scraped across the ground when they grabbed her. My knees went weak. I stumbled back to the fire pit and threw some dry twigs on the coals. I lit them with a lighter and watched the flames grow. The circle of light gave me no comfort. I called her name even though I knew it was pointless. I circled the campsite with my light for the next hour. No blood, no fur, just silence. Just those 2 deep gouges in the dirt where something had taken her. By morning, I hadn't slept at all. I packed up quickly. My hands were shaking. Every noise in the woods made me spin around. I couldn't stop picturing it. The way she had lifted her head right before it happened. The speed, the silence, the sheer strength it must have taken. When I got back to the car, I just sat inside for a while before I could bring myself to drive. Back home, I looked up what might have taken her. It didn't take long. Great horned owls, barred owls, both common in the area, both capable of lifting small animals. Most people think of them catching mice or rabbits, but a dog her size wasn't out of the question, especially at night, especially if it was hungry or had chicks nearby. They're silent hunters. They drop from trees and strike in an instant. That knowledge didn't make it any easier. The worst part wasn't just losing her. It was how fast it happened, how little I could do, how final it was. No warning, no struggle, just gone. I kept thinking maybe if I hadn't tethered her, maybe if she'd been inside the tent, maybe if I'd built a bigger fire, maybe, but I know the truth. Out there, nature doesn't wait. It doesn't care about what you love or what you're ready for. It just moves. It hunts. It lives how it always has. I still go camping, but I don't bring pets anymore. I can't. I can barely look at the spot where her leash hangs by the door. Sometimes I still wake up in the night and think I hear wings beating the air outside. And every time I go out into the woods now, I remember that night. How quick the wild can take something from you, and how quiet the forest becomes afterward. I took a solo trip up to a small cabin I'd rented in northern Ontario, not far from Lake Nipigon. It was early October, and though the leaves had mostly turned and some had already fallen, there were still splashes of red and gold in the trees. The air was crisp, but the sun still had some warmth in it. I'd been looking forward to this for weeks. No work, no phone service, just some peace and quiet in the woods. The cabin was deep in the bush, only accessible by a rough dirt road and a short hike from the main trail. It was small, one room with a cot, a wood stove, and a table with 2 chairs. There was an outhouse out back and a fire pit out front. No electricity, no running water, just me, the trees, and the silence. I spent the first couple days doing little hikes during the day and reading in the evenings by lantern light. I'd brought enough food and supplies for a week. There were tracks in the mud near the river, deer mostly, and something I figured was probably a black bear. I'd seen a couple of them on previous trips, always from a distance. They never stuck around long when they noticed me. The nights were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice every little sound. Leaves dropping, branches creaking, mice scrabbling around under the cabin. The wind through the trees sometimes sounded like whispering if I let my imagination run. But that was normal. That's just the woods at night. It was the 4th night when something changed. That day had been colder than the others. Gray sky, no sun. I kept the fire going in the stove and stayed close to the cabin. Made coffee in the morning, did some journaling, then walked a short loop trail in the early afternoon. Came back, made soup, and sat by the fire outside until the sun dipped behind the trees. By the time I locked up and got into bed, the wind had picked up. The trees made more noise than usual. It wasn't raining, but the clouds looked like they might bring something. I settled in under a couple wool blankets and listened to the stove tick as it cooled. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up, not all at once. More like I gradually became aware that I was awake. My eyes were still closed, but I was alert. There was a sound, not a sharp sound, nothing sudden. A kind of slow, steady movement outside. Something moving through the brush. Not heavy footsteps, but not small either. It wasn't a deer. I'd heard deer before, they move quick and light. This was slower, like someone deliberately pushing their way through the undergrowth. I kept still, just listened. It moved in a wide arc around the cabin, crunching leaves, snapping small branches. Then it stopped. I couldn't hear breathing. No snorting, no huffing, just stillness. Then I heard it, a low, slow clicking sound, like someone slowly tapping 2 rocks together. Just 3 or 4 clicks and then silence again. I lay in bed, breathing as shallow as I could. My heart was going fast, but I wasn't panicked yet. Animals make weird noises. I told myself that. Could have been a porcupine gnawing on something. Could have been a raccoon. But it didn't feel right. I'd spent enough nights in the bush to know when something didn't sound right. A few minutes passed. Then the clicking came again. A little louder. 5 or 6 clicks. Then a dragging sound, like something was pulling something through the dirt. Not a lot of weight, but enough to disturb the leaves. I sat up slowly and pulled on my jacket and boots. I didn't turn on the lantern. Didn't want to light anything that would cast shadows. I stepped to the window and looked out. Nothing. Just trees and blackness. Then the sound came again. Right behind the cabin. It was a scraping noise. Slow and steady. Like something hard being dragged against the wall. I turned and looked at the far side of the room. The wall was bare wood. No windows. Just one of the corners of the cabin. The noise kept going. A dry, scratchy dragging. I backed away from the wall. My mouth was dry. I wanted to call out, but didn't. What would I say? I didn't want to let whatever it was know that I was awake. I crouched by the stove and grabbed the hatchet I kept nearby for splitting kindling. The scratching stopped. I waited. Minutes passed. Then came the breathing. It was so faint I thought I might be imagining it. A long, slow exhale. Not animal-like. No huffing or snorting. Just controlled breathing. Slow inhale. Slow exhale. Right outside the wall. I stayed crouched, not moving. Then something tapped the wall. Just a single tap. Like a finger. Then nothing. No footsteps walking away. No movement. Just silence again. I sat there for an hour, maybe more. Eventually, I climbed back into bed, still holding the hatchet, and kept one eye open until I fell asleep from exhaustion. In the morning, everything looked the same, but when I went around to the back of the cabin, I found shallow scratches in the wood. Not claw marks, something else. Long, straight lines about chest height, like someone had dragged the edge of a rock or tool across the logs. The ground had been disturbed too. Leaves cleared in patches. Small depressions in the dirt like knees or elbows had been resting there. No boot prints. No paw prints. Just signs of something low to the ground, moving slow. I packed my things and hiked out early. There was no damage to the cabin. Nothing stolen. No blood. Nothing definitive. Just signs. I kept telling myself it could have been anything. A big wolverine. Maybe a human messing around. But the breathing, that wasn't a wolverine. And the scratches weren't random. They looked deliberate. Back home, I told a few people. No one had a good answer. Could have been someone squatting in the woods, they said. Could have been someone with mental issues. But I hadn't seen any signs of another person. No wrappers. No fire rings. No clothes or tools. Nothing left behind. That was 2 years ago. I haven't gone back to that cabin. I still camp. Still go into the woods. But I don't sleep as well. I wake up at the slightest sound. I keep a headlamp and a knife within reach. I trust my instincts a lot more now. Whatever that thing was that night, it wasn't just passing through. Came up to the cabin. It listened, touched the walls. It wanted something, or maybe it was just watching, testing, seeing how close it could get. I'll never know exactly what it was, but it was real, and it was out there. And the scariest part is knowing that I was completely alone, and something chose to come that close, that quietly, and then leave without a trace. That's what stuck with me. Not the scratches, not the sounds, just the feeling that something was watching me and chose not to leave right away. And I still wonder if it's been back, or if it's still out there, waiting for the next quiet cabin in the woods. I had never felt fear in the woods like I did that night on the Ogoki River. It started out like any other backcountry trip. A group of us had been planning this for months. 5 guys with decent outdoor experience, all familiar with paddling, fishing, and basic bushcraft. We chose Wabakimi because it wasn't crowded like the more popular parks in southern Ontario. It's remote, harder to reach, and you have to know what you're doing to stay safe. That was part of the appeal. Fewer people. More nature, real wilderness. We came in by float plane, landing on a wide stretch of the Ogoki River. The pilot gave us the usual talk before flying off. Watch for weather changes, keep your bear spray close, mark your map with backups in case wind or water levels change the route. Once he left and the sound of the plane faded, It was just us and the trees, the water, and the silence. We paddled for a couple of hours to reach a campsite we'd marked ahead of time. It was a good spot. Flat ground above the river, natural windbreaks from thick pines, and a stone fire pit someone had built years before. We set up camp, got a fire going, and boiled water for dinner. The bugs were out in clouds, but we were used to it. Long sleeves and DEET made it manageable. The first couple of days went smooth. We fished during the day and took turns cleaning our catch. The river was calm, and the weather held steady. Cool nights, warm days, a few clouds, but no sign of a storm. We kept a tight camp. Food hung high, nothing left out. Our tents were spaced close together in case something went wrong, though nothing had. I remember the night everything changed started off almost peaceful. I was sitting on a boulder near the fire, eating some dried meat and looking out across the water. The sun had just dipped behind the trees, leaving everything in that orange half-light. The river had gone glass smooth, and the breeze was gone. It felt heavy, like the air had thickened all at once. One of the guys had gone to filter water, another was in the tent going through the map. I stayed by the fire with the others, keeping the flames up because we figured we'd cook something late. It wasn't long before we started hearing something unusual across the river. At first, it sounded like branches snapping, sharp, sudden, irregular cracks that didn't match the wind or the usual forest sounds. Then something thudded hard, like a body hitting the ground. We froze. I looked across the water, eyes scanning the darkening tree line. There was movement, quick and jagged, and it was too big to be a deer. We saw brush shaking and more snapping. Louder now, closer, more violent. Something was going on over there. We stood up, one by one, as whatever was happening escalated. The sounds were clearer now. Snarling, a deep growl followed by something higher pitched, almost like a scream. It wasn't human. It wasn't even a regular animal call. It was raw, full of pain and rage and desperation. Cut through everything. Then we saw it. The trees across the river were shaking, and something large came into view. A bear, a massive one, dark and broad-shouldered. Its fur streaked with mud and something darker. It was reared up, slamming down into the undergrowth. Another shape darted through the brush, lower to the ground, lean, fast. At first, we couldn't tell what it was. Too big for a wolf, too quick and fluid for another bear. It had a tail long and sweeping. It circled the bear, darted in, raked with claws, then jumped back. It hit me all at once. It was a big cat, either a lynx, though huge for one, or a cougar. They weren't supposed to be that far north, at least not often, but this wasn't a normal animal. It moved like it had something to prove, and it wasn't running. It was fighting. The bear lunged again, and the two collided, vanishing behind a curtain of thick underbrush. What followed was a mix of growls, yelps, snapping wood, and grunts that shook the air. Something big hit a tree hard enough to send leaves falling like rain. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It felt wrong to watch, but I couldn't turn away. This wasn't a hunt. This wasn't a predator going after food. It was a battle. We backed up from the water's edge. Not far, but enough to make sure we weren't in range if something came crashing through the trees. None of us said anything. We just moved, instinct more than thought. The fire crackled behind us, throwing shadows that danced on the tent walls. We kept staring across the river. The fight didn't stop. At times it went silent, then erupted again, louder than before. Once, the cat leapt onto the bear's back, claws sinking deep. The bear rolled, slamming it to the ground. The thud was so loud we felt it in our chests. Dust and leaves kicked up around them as they twisted, bit, and tore. I saw the cougar's eyes once, wide, wild, locked in. There was blood in its fur, thick in streaks along its ribs. The bear was worse. One ear was nearly gone. His mouth dripped red. It stood up again, swaying, and charged a final time. Both animals hit each other with everything they had. The impact sent them into a dead tree that snapped halfway up. Came down in pieces, branches cracking, leaves exploding. Then nothing. It was quiet, not like before. This was a dead, Eerie silence. No crickets, no frogs, no wind, just the river flowing slow. We stood there, waiting for something to move. A shape, a sound, anything. But the brush across the river stayed still. It took maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10. I honestly lost track of time before we heard one last noise. A dragging sound, soft and wet, then a crash farther off into the trees. Then nothing again. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. We kept the fire going until dawn, every one of us on edge. I sat with my back against my pack, eyes half closed but alert. Every gust of wind made me jump. Every snapping twig beyond the treeline made my gut twist. Whatever had happened out there had shaken something in us we didn't even know could be shaken. The next morning, we waited until the sun was fully up before we crossed the river. We paddled over slowly, half expecting something to lunge out of the brush. But the forest was calm. Not peaceful, just quiet. Too quiet. We pulled up to the edge where we'd seen the fight and found the ground torn to hell. Trees were broken, some halfway up the trunk, others splintered at the base. Deep claw marks ran through the bark, some horizontal like something had been thrown against them. The undergrowth was flattened in places, and there were pools of blood, already starting to turn dark and crust over. It was everywhere. Blood on the ferns, blood on stones, even splattered on tree trunks chest high. Hair too, coarse dark clumps that must have come from the bear, and finer lighter tufts, almost golden, from the cat. We saw drag marks leading into the trees, and we followed them for maybe 50 feet before we found the cougar. It was dead, its body half twisted, eyes open but empty. There were deep gashes along its sides, one foreleg bent at a sick angle, broken ribs pushing against its skin. The way it had fallen told us everything. It didn't run away, collapsed while walking. It bled out slow. We didn't find the bear. The drag marks went further, but we decided not to follow. We didn't know if it was still alive, hurt, and dangerous. And honestly, I didn't want to see it. Whatever it had gone through, whatever damage it had taken, it wasn't the kind of thing you forget. We left that afternoon, cut the trip short and paddled hard. Slept only when we had to. The mood had changed. None of us felt the same about the forest anymore. We didn't talk about what we saw, just packed up, moved fast, and kept our bear spray out. When the float plane came back to pick us up, we didn't even say much to the pilot. Just loaded our gear and sat quiet on the way back. It wasn't until we were flying over the trees again that I realized how big the wilderness really is. How much happens out there that no one ever sees. No cameras, no explanations, just survival. Raw and brutal and real. That fight, that moment, stuck with me. Not because it was exciting or wild or like something out of a nature documentary, but because it reminded me how small we are out there. How close everything is to tipping into something deadly. We think we understand nature. We think we can handle it. But that night showed me we're guests, and sometimes we get to see what happens when the real residents settle their scores. We never went back to that part of Wabakimi. Not because it wasn't beautiful, it was. But some places just change after something like that. You see a scar in the land, and it makes a scar in you too. And sometimes that's enough. I'd always liked camping alone. It helped clear my head. No phones, no internet, no small talk. Just trees, wind, water, and the sound of everything you forget when you're living in town. I used to go out at least twice a year, usually spring and fall when the bugs weren't bad. I wasn't a survivalist or anything, just a guy who liked to be left alone for a few days in the woods. This trip was in late October. I had a long weekend and needed to get away from work. I chose a place I'd never been before, a small national forest area in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It wasn't one of those places with marked campsites or fire pits. It was dispersed camping, which meant you could set up anywhere as long as you were off the trail and didn't damage anything. I looked over satellite maps, planned a route in, and figured I'd hike about 6 miles into the woods, find a high ridge near a creek, and pitch camp for a couple of nights. The weather was supposed to be dry but cold, lows in the high 30s. I packed accordingly. Tent, pad, sleeping bag, jet boil, food, layers, bear spray. I brought a revolver too, not for bears, but just in case I had an unexpected run-in with a person. That's one thing I've learned over time. The woods don't scare me, but people can, especially far from help. I started the hike just after noon. Took me longer than expected. The forest was thick, mostly pine and maple, and there was a lot of uneven ground, old growth, fallen logs, thick underbrush in spots. I didn't see another person the whole time. Once I got about 4 miles in, I started noticing how quiet everything was. No birds, no squirrels, nothing moving in the trees. It wasn't creepy, just still. The sky was gray and the sun was starting to drop. So I picked up the pace and pushed toward the ridge I'd marked. By the time I got to the spot I'd picked out, I was tired and sweating under all my layers. The ridge sloped gently down to a small stream. The trees opened up just enough to give me a flat, dry place to set up the tent. No sign of people, no trash, no footprints, no signs of other camps. Just clean, cold woods. I pitched my tent, filtered water, boiled it for dinner. As the light faded, the temperature dropped fast. I got into my sleeping bag early and read a paperback by headlamp until I felt my eyes getting heavy. The woods were so quiet that night, I remember thinking it almost felt artificial, like the air was holding its breath. I must have dozed off around 10. I woke sometime in the night, cold and stiff, needing to pee. I sat up slowly, unzipped the tent, and stepped out into the dark. The sky was cloudy, no moon, no stars. I used my headlamp, but the beam didn't go far. Everything around me looked like a wall of trees. As I stood there, I felt a sudden shift, like the quiet wasn't just a lack of sound, but something pushing in. It's hard to explain, just a feeling, like something had changed out there. I finished up quickly, scanned the woods out of habit, then zipped myself back in. I lay there for a while, listening. No wind, no insects, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my own breathing. Eventually, I fell back asleep. The next morning was gray again, a little colder. I boiled water for coffee, ate some trail mix, and wandered a bit to scout the area. I followed the creek for maybe a quarter mile upstream. It twisted through a narrow gully, rocks slick with moss and leaves. At one point, I noticed a strange mark on a tree, low down, maybe 2 feet off the ground. A gouge, like someone had run a knife or hatchet sideways across the bark. Clean cut, not weathered. It looked fresh. I found another one about 30 yards away. Same height, same angle. That made me stop and think. Could have been another camper, maybe marking a path, but it seemed odd. There weren't trails out here, and the marks weren't directional like a blaze. Just slashes. I kept going for a bit, saw no more signs, and circled back toward camp. I wrote it off. Maybe an animal. Maybe someone had camped here months ago and it just hadn't weathered much. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. I fished the creek with no luck, ate a freeze-dried meal for dinner, and watched the light disappear through the trees. As night fell, the quiet returned. That same deep stillness, like the whole forest had gone to sleep. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke again. This time I didn't know why. I wasn't cold. I didn't need to use the bathroom. I just opened my eyes and felt something wasn't right. I listened. Still nothing. No wind, no animals. I turned on my headlamp, shined it around the inside of the tent. Everything looked normal, but I had the strongest feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I don't mean in some supernatural way. I mean someone was out there, maybe watching the tent. I laid there a while, heart beating fast, holding still and listening. After a minute, I clicked the light off and waited. The air outside felt too quiet, like it was holding something. Then I heard it, a stick snap. Not far, maybe 30 feet downhill, near the creek. It was just one sound, but it was enough. I sat up, reached for my flashlight, and grabbed the revolver from beside my bag. I didn't shine the light yet, just waited, ears straining. After maybe a minute, I heard another snap, then a rustle, then quiet again. Now I was sure. Someone or something was down there, moving slow, trying not to make noise. The brush was too thick for deer to move through silently. And this wasn't a bear. Bears crash around. This was calculated, slow, measured. I unzipped the tent quietly and stepped outside in my boots and base layer. The air was cold and damp, but I barely felt it. I stayed low, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other, and listened. Nothing. Then, after maybe 2 minutes of stillness, I saw a flicker, just a glimpse of movement between the trees down the slope. My light caught something briefly. I aimed it again, more focused this time. Nothing there. No eye shine, no outline. Just trees and dark. I stood out there for what felt like forever, barely breathing. Eventually I went back in, didn't take off my boots or coat, just laid there with the gun beside me and the light still in my hand. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. First light, I packed. Fast. I skipped breakfast, threw gear into my pack, and didn't even bother with proper roll-ups. I just wanted to get out. The whole hike back I kept looking behind me, stopping every quarter mile to listen. Never saw or heard anyone, but that didn't ease the feeling. It followed me all the way out. When I reached my truck, I locked the doors and sat there for a while before starting the engine. I drove straight to the closest gas station, got coffee, and just sat in the lot drinking it with my hands shaking. A week later, I got curious. I searched online for any reports of missing people or crimes in that area. I didn't find anything current, but I did come across a post on a local forum, someone talking about finding signs of squatting deep in those woods a few years back. Things like hidden camps, old shelters, snares, and half-buried trash. No details, no photos, just a warning that the area didn't feel right. I haven't been back since. I still camp, still hike, but now I stay in areas where I can see other people. I don't go as deep, and I don't sleep as soundly, because out there, away from everything, it's not what you see that stays with you. It's what you hear, what you don't see, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, someone else was out there too, and they were waiting, watching, just close enough. I took my son fishing last August, deep into the backcountry of northern Minnesota. It was meant to be a bonding trip, just the two of us. No cell service, no distractions, only the sound of water and wind through the trees. He's 13, just started showing that quiet distance boys get at that age, and I figured the long weekend would give us a chance to connect. I chose a remote area I had camped near as a teen, about 3 hours of rough trail after the last dirt road, far from anything you'd call civilization. We packed light but smart: tent, stove, sleeping bags, water filter, bear canisters, rod and reel. I also brought a rifle, more out of habit than anything else. That area had black bear and the occasional wolf, though in all my years camping I'd never had a close call with either. Still, when you're that far off grid with your kid, caution becomes instinct. The trail to the river was rougher than I remembered. Overgrowth had nearly swallowed parts of it, and recent storms had brought down trees we had to crawl under or climb over. We hiked in for most of the afternoon before reaching the river. A slow-moving, wide section, bordered on both sides by pine and birch that closed in so tight it felt like we were inside a tunnel made of trees. The current was gentle, and the banks were soft and muddy in places, gravel in others. I found a clearing slightly elevated off the water where we could pitch the tent, with just enough room for a fire ring and some logs to sit on. It was a good spot. The nearest known camp area was miles away. We set up camp before dusk, cooked dinner over the stove, and fished from the bank as the light faded. The river had good movement, just enough to carry our lines out gently, and we caught a few smallmouths within an hour. He loved it. Every time he reeled one in, his face lit up, and that old closeness came back, even if only in small pieces. Felt like what I had hoped for. That night, the forest was as quiet as I'd ever heard it. We went to sleep early, maybe around 10. The air was still, and the only sounds were the soft flow of the river and the occasional owl far off. I remember waking around midnight, needing to relieve myself, and stepping outside. The sky was overcast, no moonlight, pitch black beyond the reach of my headlamp. I didn't hear anything then, not even crickets, just complete stillness. That kind of silence makes you pause. It's not something you notice unless it's unusually deep. I got back in the tent, zipped it up, and drifted off again. I must have only been asleep for another hour before something pulled me out of it. A sound, not a rustle or crack or anything natural. It was laughter, At first, I wasn't even sure that's what it was. It started low, like someone stifling a laugh into their hand, and I laid there thinking maybe I imagined it. But then it came again. Louder, definitely laughter. Human. I sat up quickly, still in my sleeping bag, listening. My son stirred a little beside me but didn't wake. The laughter came again, then again, strange, breathy bursts with long pauses between, as if someone across the river was laughing at something they couldn't stop thinking about. Except there shouldn't have been anyone out there. We hadn't passed a single soul on our way in, and this wasn't a place you accidentally stumbled across. I unzipped the tent slowly, not wanting to wake my kid. The forest outside was dark. No stars, no moon, only the soft orange light of the dying embers in our fire ring. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it across the river. Nothing. The beam lit up trees, rocks, water, but no person. The laughter kept going, though, and now it was changing. It wasn't just chuckling anymore. It had shifted into something louder, more hysterical, high-pitched bursts like someone totally losing it. I kept sweeping the light back and forth, my other hand resting on the rifle beside me, heart pounding. There was no movement, no answering voice, just that laugh. I called out once, just a short, sharp, "Hey!" But the laughter didn't stop, didn't change. That's what got to me. I stood there listening to it for probably 10 minutes. Then I stepped away from the tent and walked closer to the riverbank. It wasn't just laughter now. It was echoing in a strange way, bouncing back across the water, but wrong somehow, like it wasn't following the natural flow of the landscape. It came in waves, sometimes overlapping itself, as if there were two voices nearly in sync, one a half second behind the other. But it was all coming from the same direction, across the river. The water was wide, maybe 70 feet across, and beyond it, the woods were too dense for anyone to move quickly through. I stood there for a long time, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. But it kept changing, sounding like it was to the left, then the right, then directly ahead. I kept my flashlight on, sweeping the woods, but never saw a glint of eyes or a shape or a figure. It was just voice, just sound. I went back to the tent eventually, still listening. The laughter didn't stop. It would go quiet for maybe 30 seconds, then start again. Hysterical bursts, breathy wheezing, giggles turning into hacking cackles. My son was awake by then, though he didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and I could tell he'd heard it too. I didn't say a word. I didn't want him to get more scared than he already was. We lay there until dawn. Neither of us slept. The laughter finally stopped around 5 a.m. Not with a scream or a fade out, but like a switch being flipped. One moment it was echoing across the trees. The next it was gone. Just the sound of the river again. Just the wind in the leaves. And that was almost worse. The sudden absence of it felt like something closing in. Like whatever had been making that sound wasn't gone. It had just gone quiet. We packed up right after sunrise. No breakfast. No fishing. We moved fast, not talking, barely stopping. It took us almost 6 hours to get back to the trailhead. We passed no one. Not a footprint. Not a campsite. Not even old coals from someone else's fire. It was like we had been the only people in that entire section of woods. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not because I didn't believe what happened, but because I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't have any proof, just the sound and my son's scared face. I figured maybe someone had been camping illegally across the river. Maybe they were drunk or high or just unwell. But it still didn't sit right. It didn't sound like one person. Or if it was, they were doing something with their voice I couldn't explain. A week later, I was back home, sitting at the kitchen table, when I saw a news article online. It was local to that area. Said a man had gone missing while camping along the same river, same general region. They didn't give a lot of detail, just that he had been alone, hadn't been seen since a Friday, and his truck had been found abandoned near the trailhead 3 days later. I looked at the date. The night he disappeared was the same night we'd heard the laughter. They didn't give a name, didn't release much else, but it rattled me. I showed the article to my wife and son. He read it quietly, then looked at me like he already knew what I was thinking. We both knew that whoever we had heard, or whatever it was, that night, it might have had something to do with that man disappearing. I called the county sheriff's office anonymously and told them what we heard. Gave the date, the approximate location, everything. They thanked me. I never heard anything back. I've thought about it a lot since then. I even looked into the missing persons case again months later, but there were no updates. No one ever found him. No suspects, no signs of struggle, no camp remains. Just gone. We haven't gone back since. I still take my son camping, but never that deep, never that remote, and always near other people. I still don't know what we heard that night. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't wind or echoes or my imagination. I know what I heard. My son does too. And I still wonder, sometimes late at night, if we had crossed the river, what we might have found, or what might have found us. I've done a lot of solo hiking over the years, always preferring the quiet over the buzz of groups. Being alone out there has a way of silencing everything. No noise, no obligations, no distractions. Just you and the woods. I've never felt scared in the wild. I've seen bears, heard wolves, dealt with steep drops and sudden storms. I've had close calls, but never anything that stuck with me. That changed in late September of last year, somewhere near the Kootenai National Forest, not far from the Montana-Idaho border. I'd set out on a 4-day solo trek through an area I'd scouted out online. It wasn't a popular trail, which I liked. I parked near a closed forest road and hiked in about 10 miles the first day, following a mix of old logging routes and game trails. I made camp in a clearing near a small creek, cooked some food on my camp stove, and slept well. The air was already crisp that time of year, and I had the area completely to myself. No tents, no distant fires, no far-off voices. Just birds, the wind, and the sound of water moving over rock. By the third day, I was deep into the backcountry. I didn't have a fixed destination, I was just exploring. I had a GPS unit, paper maps, and a backup battery, so I felt comfortable wandering. That day started early, before sunrise. I packed up camp, ate a protein bar and some jerky, then started heading northwest through a steep ridge that I wanted to cross before the weather turned. The clouds had been building the day before, and I didn't want to get caught up high in a storm. The climb was slow, and I zigzagged through thick forest. The trees up there were mostly pine and fir, tall and spaced just enough that sunlight made it through in streaks. The ground was a mess of fallen needles, slick with dew, and I had to be careful not to twist an ankle. Around mid-morning, I stopped for a break on a small rock shelf. I dropped my pack, drank some water, and checked my GPS. That's when I saw it. About 30 feet off the trail, maybe less, I noticed something shiny catching the light. It was odd, metallic but dull. I assumed it was trash or maybe an old tool. But when I walked closer, I saw it clearly. An axe wedged blade first into the trunk of a pine tree. Not just any axe, it was a full-sized felling axe with a thick wooden handle and a heavy steel head. The blade was buried several inches deep into the tree, almost like someone had thrown it or slammed it in with force. What stopped me cold was the blood. It wasn't old, rust-colored blood. It was fresh, still wet, dark red, thick, smeared across the blade and down the bark. The way it had splattered looked wrong, not like an accident or an animal kill. There were no tracks around it, no broken branches, no disturbed earth, just the axe and the blood. I stood there for a long time just staring at it. I didn't touch it. I didn't want my prints on anything. I took out my phone and snapped a bunch of photos from different angles. I also marked the GPS coordinates. I circled the area for at least an hour, checking for anything else. Clothing, drag marks, animal remains, boot prints, but there was nothing. It was like someone had teleported in, swung that axe, and vanished. I debated for a while whether to hike out right then, but I was already halfway through my planned loop, and I figured the smart thing would be to finish it and report everything once I was back in town. There was no sign of a struggle, no sounds, no signs of anyone nearby. It was eerie, but I didn't feel watched. Not then, anyway. That night, I set up camp by a lake about 2 miles further. I couldn't shake the image of the axe, and I barely slept. Every noise outside the tent made me sit up. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind. I didn't even start a fire. I just sat in the dark with my bear spray and knife nearby, It was the first time I'd felt afraid in the woods. Not from animals, but from people. From things that didn't add up. I hiked out the next day, cutting through the last 7 miles in about 5 hours. I didn't stop to eat, just powered through, glancing over my shoulder more times than I want to admit. Once I hit the dirt road and got back to my truck, I finally exhaled. I didn't see another person until I pulled into Libby later that afternoon. I went straight to the ranger station. I showed them the photos and gave them the GPS coordinates. They were polite but non-committal. They said they'd send someone out, take a look. I didn't expect much from them. I also filed a non-emergency police report. Again, the officer took down the details, asked a few questions, but nothing came of it. I gave them my number in case they needed to follow up. 3 weeks went by. I didn't hear anything. Then I caught a headline in the local paper. Something about a body found in the woods near the Cabinet Mountains. The article was vague. Just said a hunter had stumbled on human remains about 6 miles from where I'd found the axe. No name released, no details on cause of death. I kept checking for updates every few days, but nothing new came out. The authorities didn't mention anything about the axe, and I never got a call. The more time passed, the more it messed with me. I kept going over everything I saw. The angle of the blade in the tree, how fresh the blood was, the fact there were no signs of a scuffle. No prints, no gear, no trash. Just that axe stuck like a warning. I even tried to do some digging on my own. I posted anonymously on a hiking forum, asking if anyone else had seen anything strange in the area. A few people messaged me, asking for more info, but nobody had anything solid. One guy claimed he'd hiked nearby that same weekend and heard something heavy moving through the brush late at night. He chalked it up to moose or elk. Another person said there were rumors of an illegal grow-op in those woods and that maybe the axe was a warning, meant to scare people off. But again, no proof, just guesses. Stuck with me all winter. Every time I saw my gear in the garage, every time I opened my trail maps, that feeling came back. I started having dreams about being back in the woods, walking in circles, always ending up at that same tree with the axe. I'd wake up cold, like I was outside again. Eventually, I tried to put it behind me. Spring came and I did some small hikes close to town. Nothing too remote. I avoided overnight trips. I didn't tell many people about it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what to say. I found a bloody axe in the middle of nowhere and then a body turned up nearby, but nobody's saying they're connected. It sounds like something out of a bad crime show. Then, in early May, I got a text from an unknown number. It was just a photo, no caption. It was one of the pictures I'd taken of the axe, but zoomed in and cropped differently. It wasn't from my phone. I never posted the photos anywhere, not publicly. My stomach dropped. I texted back, asking who it was. No reply. I called the number, it was disconnected. I sat there staring at my phone for what felt like an hour. I checked my email, my cloud storage, everything I could think of. Nothing showed any sign of being hacked. But someone had that photo, and they wanted me to know it. That's when I stopped hiking altogether. I sold off most of my gear. I deleted the forum accounts I'd used. I even changed my number a few weeks later. I didn't want any trace of me connected to that trip. I told myself I was being paranoid, but that photo proved something. Someone was out there, someone who didn't want that axe found. I think about it more than I want to admit. The angle of the blade, the depth it was buried. It would take strength and precision to do that. And the fact that it was clean, no dirt, no signs of being dropped or dragged. It wasn't left behind in a panic. It was placed there, intentionally, like a marker, a message. I don't know who died in those woods. I don't know if it was murder, a fight gone wrong, or something else entirely. But I do know that whatever happened, someone didn't want it found. And I got too close. People talk about the wilderness being peaceful, healing, and it is. But it's also big enough to hide anything. Out there, you don't get cell service. You don't get surveillance cameras or streetlights. You just get trees, dirt, and silence. Things can happen in the forest, and unless someone like me stumbles on it by chance, it stays hidden. I've accepted I won't get answers. The police aren't going to call. No one's going to arrest anybody. That person or people are probably still out there. Maybe they live nearby. Maybe they hike the same trails. Maybe they even saw me that day. I still have the photos. They're on an old flash drive tucked in the back of a drawer, just in case. I don't look at them anymore, but I can see them in my head clearly. The bark split around the blade. The color of the blood against the wood. The way it all felt too quiet. That trip changed how I see the woods. I used to feel free out there. Now I feel small, like I've seen the edge of something I wasn't supposed to, and I'm not going back. I've tried to forget most of what happened on that trip, but some details just won't leave my head. I still dream about it sometimes, even now, years later. I wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, even though nothing in the dream actually happens. Just images. That tree, the empty fire pit, cold ground, frost on my hands. Sometimes I hear a sound too, something quiet but wrong, but I can never place it when I wake up. Just an awful weight in my chest and a pit in my stomach, like something still unfinished. That trip near Glacier National Park was supposed to be just a few days of camping and hiking. Me, Kyle, and Marcus, we'd all grown up together in Kalispell. We'd been camping all over Montana when we were younger, sometimes with our dads or brothers, but more often just the three of us. We'd been through rainstorms in early spring, winter treks through crusted snowpack, and even a bear scare once up near the Yaak. Never anything weird. Never anything we couldn't chalk up to weather, wildlife, or our own mistakes. This trip was supposed to be no different. It was late September, chilly, but not yet full-blown cold. The days were still long enough to hike without rushing, and the fall colors were peaking. We parked just outside the boundary of the national park, near an unmarked trail that Kyle had heard about from someone he worked with. It wasn't an official site, which suited us fine. We weren't the type to stay near big campgrounds with cars and generators and people playing music until 2 a.m. We wanted the woods, the quiet, real quiet. We parked at the end of an old logging road, shouldered our packs, and hiked in for a few miles. It was rough trail, overgrown and barely marked, but we kept heading uphill until we found a shelf of flat ground looking out over a narrow river valley. The spot felt perfect. A little clearing ringed by trees, soft ground, no obvious signs of animals or water runoff. We set up camp, dug a pit for the fire, and stashed our bear canisters well away from the tent. We did everything by the book. Proper setup, tidy gear, nothing left out that could draw attention. The first day went by like normal. We set up in the afternoon, gathered dry wood, and boiled water for dinner. Just freeze-dried stuff and coffee, but it felt good after the hike in. The three of us sat around the fire as the sun went down, talking about whatever work, stupid stuff we'd done in high school, stories we'd already told each other a dozen times. Around 10, the fire started to die down, and we all felt the chill. The temperature had dropped fast, like it often does that time of year. We climbed into our sleeping bags and zipped the tents shut tight. That's where my memory stops. I remember rolling over once in the night, trying to get comfortable. I remember hearing the wind through the trees, nothing strong, just that steady, soft rush of air moving through the high branches. Then nothing. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground, not in my sleeping bag, not in the tent, on the bare ground. It was freezing. My face felt like it had frost on it, and my hands were numb to the point where I could barely move my fingers. My legs were stiff, and my back ached like I'd been lying flat on rocks or hard-packed dirt. I opened my eyes and saw stars above me, bright, clear stars in a sky just starting to turn pale with the coming sunrise. At first, I didn't even register what was wrong. I was still half asleep, confused, and shivering. Then I sat up and saw Kyle a few feet away from me, curled up in a ball with his arms wrapped around himself. A little further, Marcus was on his side, eyes open and staring straight ahead, like he was awake but too cold or too stunned to move. We were outside the tents, all three of us. No bags, no jackets, just our base layers and whatever we'd worn to sleep. My tent was maybe 20 feet away, still standing but with the flap open and the bag missing from inside. The fire pit was cold. The firewood we'd stacked had fallen over and was scattered around. like someone had kicked it or dragged something through it. At first, I thought we'd had an animal come through camp, maybe dragged us out somehow in our sleep, though that didn't explain why we were all unharmed or how it could have happened without one of us waking up. We weren't drugged, I know that much. I never touched drugs, and I'd only had one instant coffee the night before. We didn't drink, not even a beer on that trip. That was one of our rules. No alcohol in the backcountry. Too many things can go wrong. We slowly got to our feet, teeth chattering and fingers barely working. It was probably in the low 20s. My boots were off, and when I found them, they were soaking wet like they'd been in the river, even though we hadn't been anywhere near the river before dark. Kyle's boots were missing entirely. We found them later, 30 feet up a tree, wedged in the crook of a branch like someone had thrown them with real force. All of our watches had stopped. Mine was frozen at 1:17 a.m. Kyle's and Marcus's had stopped at almost the exact same time, within a minute or two. None of us remembered anything, not even a dream, just black. 1 minute we were lying in the tent, full from dinner and half laughing at Kyle's dumb stories. And the next, we were out on the frozen ground like someone had picked us up and dropped us there. Our packs were still there. Our gear was intact, nothing stolen or chewed. The bare canisters hadn't been touched. No trash disturbed, no tracks in the dirt. We tore down camp in record time. We didn't speak much while we did it. It felt like we were all moving through some thick mental fog. Not shock exactly, but a heaviness like we were walking underwater. I kept thinking my brain would fill in the blanks eventually, like memories would snap back into place once the adrenaline wore off. But nothing ever came. We hiked out fast, barely stopping. Kyle kept looking behind us every few minutes. Marcus didn't say a word the entire hike. When we reached the truck, I saw that the clock on the dash was off too, like the battery had been disconnected and reset. The engine started fine, though. Everything worked. Our phones had powered down sometime in the night, and all three needed to be hard reset before they would turn back on. No messages, no missed calls. The signal was weak anyway, but I checked for photos or recordings. Nothing after about 9:30 p.m. the night before. When we got back to town, we split up fast. Nobody wanted to talk about it. I didn't even go home right away. I drove around for a couple of hours, windows cracked even though it was freezing, trying to shake the sense that something had gone seriously wrong. I kept checking my arms, my face, my neck, looking for marks or scratches or something that might explain what had happened, but I didn't find anything. Just a dull ache in my back and knees like I'd fallen or been dragged. I tried to forget. I really did. But the thing is, something changed in all of us after that. We didn't camp again. Not once. We used to go every month. Didn't matter the season. That trip was supposed to be the first of 3 we had planned for the fall. After that, nothing. Kyle sold most of his gear a few months later. Marcus got rid of his tent. I kept mine in the garage for years before finally throwing it out. We stopped hanging out as much too. We never fought or had some falling out, but I think we all just quietly decided that part of our lives was over. We never talked about it again, not really. I asked Kyle once if he ever remembered anything more, and he just shook his head and changed the subject. I got the message. I've read about weird events in the woods. I know what people say: missing time, strange lights, memory loss, frostbite without exposure. Some of it sounds like us, some of it doesn't. I don't have an explanation. I'm not here to give one. All I know is we went to sleep in our tents, warm and full and tired, and woke up hours later on frozen ground with no idea how we got there. No sounds, no struggle, no clues, just a dead fire, dead watches, and boots up a tree like some sick joke. And a feeling that we were being warned or maybe just tested. I've never been camping again. I never will.